This evening's Bible reading is from Genesis chapter 39. We're going to look at verses 1 to 21. If you've got a Bible, why not open it to that passage? If you've got your phone, why not look at it on your phone? It's really helpful to have it open while John speaks. Genesis 39. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, brought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and of all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care, with Joseph in charge. He did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome, and after a while his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." But he refused. "With me in charge," she told her, "my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. One day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called her household servants. "Look," she said to them, "this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." She kept his cloak beside her until his master came home. Then she told him this story. "That Hebrew slave you brought us came to me to make sport of me. But as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." When his master heard the story of the wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me," he burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden.
Thank you very much, Beth, for reading that. And it'd be great if you can keep it open in front of you. Hi, everyone. My name's John. If you don't know me, I'm one of the ministers here, and it's great to be together and to worship together. I don't know how you found the experience of singing together behind masks, but where I was standing just down there, I could hear like all of you, and you really blessed me. It's wonderful to hear God's people sing his praise again. So keep at it. And let's remember, Paul talks in the New Testament about singing to each other as well as singing to the Lord. It's part of God's plan for church that we bless each other by singing to each other and letting our praise of God encourage each other's faith and nurture each other's praise. So you blessed me this evening. Thank you so much. So to Genesis 39. And to the story of Joseph. Although, let's just reflect for a moment on the summer that we're having, because it's been quite a summer of sport, hasn't it, so far, with the Euro 2020 and the Olympics and Wimbledon and all those kinds of things, and there's still quite a bit to come. And what a week we've had. Tom Daly, who used to train just down the road at the Keys Centre, finally getting his goals, his dream fulfilled, and lots of other drama along the way. A big medal haul for Team GB so far, which for many of us here is great news. Now, I have a bit of confession to make when it comes to sport, which is that basically I'm a kind of fair weather friend with sport. So I basically support Saints, because I have to, it goes with my job description, and Liverpool, which I generally keep quiet. And strangely enough, I know, I quite like it when Djokovic wins, because I think Djokovic is kind of quirky and stretchy and fun. And so I kind of like it when he wins. So when any of those teams or individuals are doing well, I quite like my sport, and I think, I'm up for the little feel-good buzz that comes from their victory. But to be honest, when they're not doing well, I just don't care at all. From my point of view, it is not worth the emotional investment about having another thing to feel kind of depressed about. So I'm totally a fair weather friend on the sports front. Well, normally I am. But then along comes Euro 2020, and it's coming home and all that. And, Southgate, he really is such a great bloke, isn't he? And that triplet of Sterling and Rashford and Saka, they are so cool, and they're Christians, and it's great how open they've been about their faith. And, Harry Kane, he did really well to work through those couple of sort of dodgy games at the beginning and find himself. And as I watched England go through the early stages, I began to share the dream as well. Maybe it was going to come home after all. And then, of course, a couple of Sundays ago, the final came, and we had all the drama, the going a goal down, the equaliser, and then finally those painful penalties. And then just in a few seconds of insane pressure, the dream was shattered. And Euro 2020, we kind of lost interest, didn't we? It's not just sport, actually, is it, that brings about shattered dreams. Many of us, in different spheres of our lives, we have our own stories of things that we have really invested in, dreams that we have held perhaps for years and years, and then they blew up in our faces. Shattered dreams. And in many ways, I think that's what this part of Joseph's story is all about. Those of you who joined us for our fabulous day at Woodlands last week will have heard the first part of the story and those amazing dreams that God gave to Joseph of everyone bowing down to him, the sheaves of corn representing his brothers, and then the 11 stars and the moon and the sun, the brothers' mum and dad, and they're all bowing down to Joseph. And with the way his life begins, it kind of looks like he's got this glitzy future ahead of him. But before even the first chapter of the story ends, the dream begins to shatter as those jealous brothers attack him and initially want to kill him and then finally end up selling him into slavery. Joseph and shattered dreams. That's this part of the story. And we can imagine him after being sold into captivity to those Ishmaelite captors. He's chained, he's alone, he's, I'm sure, broken-hearted as he journeys into that unknown future. He's trying to process what's just happened, his brother's rejection of him, and then all the props that have kind of held his life together, that he's built his security on, they've gone. His dad's favoritism and wealth used for his advantage, just gone. And his familiar environment, just gone. And even, well, it kind of seems like his God, just gone. And then those dreams of grandeur, of other people bowing before him, and now he's just a slave at the end of the pile. The naive, happy, slightly grating teenage lad with the smart coat and the glitzy future. It's just as if he's been vaporized into almost nothing. And now he's arriving in Egypt with those strange pyramids as he walks along, and the powerful pharaohs commanding the land, and the pagan people greeting the rising sun each day with their chanting to wake the gods up. How strange and alien it must have seemed. It wasn't just that Joseph was a slave. He was, in every sense, a foreigner, out of place in Egypt. And his God, surely he just wasn't relevant in pagan Egypt, was he? And anyway, hadn't he just failed Joseph rather spectacularly? Shattered dreams in an alien land. So what's going to happen as he arrives? Verse 1, Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, of course, Pharaoh was what the Egyptians called their kings, The captain of the guards, this is quite an important guy, probably big house, brought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. So things perhaps beginning to change a little bit. It's going to be probably a fairly smart house and a well-known guy he's working for, but presumably life is going to be very brutal for him as a slave in Potiphar's household. But then this story of Joseph, it kind of seems to move between the highs and the lows so much that it almost makes you seasick, doesn't it? You know, he's got the dreams, it's so high, and then he's kind of about to be murdered, and it's so low, and he's off to Egypt. And then he gets into Egypt and Potiphar's house, and well, there's a surprise because things start to be going rather well. Verse 2, the Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered. If you were reading the story for the first time, that's not what you'd expect, is it? In Egypt, a slave, his dreams shattered, and now the Lord's with him, and he's prospering as he lives in the house of his Egyptian master. In the land of shattered dreams and pagan confusion, God is with Joseph. God was there. Do you know, it's just possible that might be the most important thing for someone here in this service this evening. Someone whose life has been overshadowed by a shattered dream and by so much confusion. And what you need to hear is just those words, God was with Joseph. God is there, waiting for you, ready for you, hasn't given up on you. He knows everything. God is there. And for Joseph, well, that meant that he was blessed in Potiphar's house. Verses 1 to 6. Look at verse 2 again. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and as he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. And Potiphar noticed the difference. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Things really are looking up. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. And then Potiphar himself started to really feel the benefit. It was as if God was blessing Joseph, and the blessing was overflowing onto Potiphar. Verse 5. From that time, Potiphar put him in charge of his household and of all that he owned. The Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he didn't concern himself with anything except the food he ate. I mean, what an image of just decadence, isn't it? Nothing to think about except for the food he ate. Because Joseph was doing such a good job. Not what you expect. What's going on? Well, did you notice how God is referred to all the way through this passage? He's referred to as the Lord, and if you look closely in your Bibles, it's the Lord with capital letters. And in the Old Testament, whenever we read the Lord with capital letters, it's translating the Hebrew word Yahweh, which was the special covenant name by which God had revealed himself to Israel. The name which every time Israel heard it reminded them of the promises by which God had committed himself to Israel and the grace within which he held them. Every time the name Lord is there, all of that comes to mind. Now, many of those promises actually came after the time of Joseph, in fact. But there is one that is specially relevant that was given to his great-grandfather, Abraham. Back in Genesis 12, a foundational promise for the whole of the Bible. The promise that God would bless the family, the offspring of Abraham, and that through the family of Abraham, he would bless all the nations of the world. And can you see how that promise precisely is what's being fulfilled here in Potiphar's house? Here is Joseph with shattered dreams in a confusing pagan land, and yet the Lord is blessing him there, just as God had promised Abraham he would do. And not only so, the blessing is overflowing from Joseph's life into the life of the Egyptian Potiphar. Through you, all the nations of the world will be blessed. It's happening right there in Potiphar's house. God, the covenant God, is fulfilling his promises and unfolding his mission. Now, some of us here doubtless find ourselves in dark and difficult places. Maybe you're in a job that you actually wouldn't choose if you could choose again. Maybe school or college or university is particularly tough. Maybe your home life or your social life are complicated, difficult, disappointing. But friend, the Lord is with you. You are his person there. He isn't just wishing that you were in church all day and that you didn't spend that time at home and in the workplace. No, you are his person there. And his desire is to bless you there. And for there to be an overflow of blessing through you to the people among whom you work and live. I know that can be incredibly tough. There's no easy answers here. But it's something to hold on to when life is as difficult for you as it was for Joseph. God hasn't left you alone. You are his representative, blessed to be a blessing. But then just as the sky is brightening for Joseph again, things seem to be picking up. Then it darkens almost as quickly as the sun had gone. Things go bad again. Joseph was blessed in Potiphar's house, but now Joseph finds himself betrayed in the very same house. Verses 6 to 20. You see, Joseph, it seems, was quite a specimen of a guy. If he were on social media, he'd have tons of followers who all said how hot he was. And it's no surprise if you know his history. His mum Rachel was quite a good looker in her time. And it seems like Joseph had inherited her fine looks, her good physique. And Potiphar's wife can't help noticing. In fact, noticing rather too much. End of verse 6. Joseph was well built and handsome, yes. And after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." Now, we need to understand the power dynamics that are going on here. Mrs. Potiphar is the wife of the master. It's pretty clear from her position, but also just from the way the text reads. She is used to getting her own way. You don't mess with her. And Joseph, he may have been kind of doing rather well, but at the end of the day, he was just a slave. He was in no position to say no to his master's wife. But if he'd said yes, just think how disastrous it would have been. So what was he going to do? The likelihood is that Potiphar's wife was very glamorous herself. And maybe a liaison with her would help Joseph climb the greasy pole, and some of those dreams that he'd had from long ago that he could never quite forget, maybe this was God's way of making them come to fruition. Not ideal, but the temptation, I guess, was intense. And it wasn't just a one-off. No, he refused her, but she came back day after day after day. Verse 10. Though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he still refused to go to bed with her or even to be with her. How did he resist? How did he stand firm in the face of such pressure and such intensity of provocation? I think there's a lot for us to learn from his example here. It's just worth pausing for a moment to see what he did. See, faced with this temptation, Joseph thinks of his master whose trust he would be betraying, and whose heart he would be breaking if he succumbed to the temptation. Verse 8, he refused. "With me in charge," he told him, "my master doesn't concern himself with anything in the house." He's thinking about the implications for Pharaoh. But then he's also thinking about the implications for his own job. End of verse 8, everything he owns he has entrusted to my care. He trusts me. If I break his trust, what's going to happen? And then, of course, he thinks about his loyalty to God. Verse 9, "No one in this house is greater than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you because you're his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing?" There's a loyalty to his master. "And sin against God." There's his loyalty to his God. But I think it's really important that he named the sin as wicked. Did you notice that? Because I think there's something particular about sexual sin, that when temptation is intense, it doesn't feel wicked. It just feels attractive. And so to name it as wicked is so important. If you find yourself in the grip of sexual temptation, you need to name it for what it is. And he kept refusing day after day, verse 10, and he kept his distance from her, end of verse 10, refusing even to be with her. And then when he found himself in a situation of serious risk, he ran away. Verse 11, one day he went into the house to attend to his duties. None of the household servants was inside. Potiphar's wife caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. The New Testament tells us that we should resist the devil and run from temptation. We often get it confused and think that what we're meant to do is resist temptation and kind of run from the devil. But actually, we'd be wiser to run from the temptation itself. That's what Potiphar's example teaches us. And so he resists. He does the right thing. But then, rather than be rewarded for his moral courage, he's betrayed by the very woman who had tried to seduce him. Verses 13 to 18 tell the story. When she saw that he'd left his cloak in her hand and run out of the house, she called her household servants. "Look," she said, "this Hebrew has been brought here to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of this house." In other words, it's all his fault. It's all his idea. He's responsible, not me. He's betrayed her. And then, of course, Potiphar comes back and he tells her exactly the same lie. See, if you said no to Mrs. Potiphar, she would make sure that you suffered for it. And so it is that Joseph ends up carted off to prison. Verses 19 and 20. The king's prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. Joseph betrayed in the very house where he had found such blessing. And yet, the story still isn't quite over. Because the God who stood at Joseph's side in Potiphar's house now stood at his side in the prison. Verse 21, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warder. It's like history repeating itself. And so the warder put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison and was made responsible for all that was done there. The warder paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. Now, we're going to see where that story kind of goes next week. But I don't want us to just sanitize this story with a nice, neat, happy ending because we've kind of jumped ahead of it. Joseph is blessed and Joseph is faithful, yet still Joseph is betrayed. Let's not try and clean that up. That was the harsh reality. And it's confusing, isn't it? Not the way we expect it to be. You expect if you're faithful, you're going to be rewarded. But he was rewarded only with betrayal, at least at this stage. Very confusing. And life is confusing. And it is, isn't it, so hard to keep trusting that God has a plan when life is like that and seems just to descend into sheer chaos. It's as if there seems no plan at all. Probably in various ways, life feels like that for some of us right now. Holiday plans ruined, student years blighted, careers that look so uncertain, relationships strained to breaking point by months of lockdown and separation. It's hard. And, just to speak very personally for a minute, I went into the pandemic with so many dreams for Above Bar Church, for what we would be as the church in the city, for the mission that we were called to with the church that God had built, for the ministry I dreamed that I would be exercising. So many dreams. And yet, to be honest, so many of those dreams lie quite shattered now for me after a brutal 18 months of losses and setbacks and separation and serial disappointments. Sometimes leading a Bud Bar right now feels like we're kind of lurching from one set of guidelines to another, trying our best to just keep things going and slowly to rebuild, but really struggling actually to find our way forward. Shattered dreams, you know about them. I know about them. It's not easy. But if Joseph wasn't the first to be in the place of shattered dreams, he certainly wasn't the last either. And this gives us just a glint of hope with which to finish this evening, because we're going to think finally about Jesus and shattered dreams. Remember, God sent Joseph to Egypt, ultimately in order to save many people. And when he was there, God blessed him. And yet Joseph was betrayed there. God had actually already told Abraham of the plan to take the family to Egypt and there to rescue them. And Joseph's visit there, Joseph's suffering there, was the first step in that great salvation plan that God had. A plan, though, that points way beyond itself to Jesus. Because just as God sent Joseph to Egypt and blessed him, but then allowed him to be betrayed there, so also Jesus was sent by the Father into our world, where he too was wonderfully blessed and yet painfully betrayed. Remember his baptism, where the Father speaks over him, "This is my Son whom I love, with him I am well pleased." And the Holy Spirit descends on him with power. Wonderful blessing from the Father. Jesus was blessed on earth. And Jesus was tested on earth, rather like Joseph, taken to the alien environment of the wilderness and tempted, and yet resisted because he knew God was with him. And then, like Joseph, Jesus was betrayed, rejected by his own people whom he had come to save, betrayed by a close friend, denied and disowned by another, deserted by all of them, and left to die in agony on a Roman cross. But just as Joseph's suffering in Egypt was part of God's great plan to bless and save many nations, as we'll see in the next few weeks, so Jesus' suffering was for us. He died on the cross to set us free from all of the sin in our own hearts and lives, so that instead of being punished forever for our guilt, we could live now and forever as his friends and his followers. And then after his death, Jesus was raised to life and is now king forever, seated on the throne of God. Can you see the parallel? Blessed and betrayed, Joseph, and yes, Jesus. And in the famous words of Genesis 50, verse 20, it was all part of God's plan. You intended it for evil, Joseph finally said to his brothers, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. The suffering of Jesus is ultimately the end of all our suffering. And his resurrection is the beginning of our hope. And his presence with us by the Spirit is the guarantee that we need now in our suffering of a better world to come. So when our dreams are shattered, when our lives are clouded with painful chaos, we can look at the story of Joseph and know that God still rules and still cares and hasn't lost the plot but has a plan. But we can also look to Jesus and put our trust in him, knowing that he has led us through death and into resurrection life, knowing that there is a future in him in which our very best dreams will be fulfilled in a way which completely transcends our imagination and expectation. As we live with Jesus and live like Jesus and reign with Jesus forever. Because he suffered, he died, he was raised, and now he lives for us. So we're going to take a few moments. We're coming towards communion, but we're just going to take a few moments to respond quietly to what we've heard this evening, and then we're going to hear a testimony. So would you just take a moment to bow your heads, and we'll take a bit of quiet to reflect. And maybe in the stillness, you might want to just bring to Jesus your particular shattered dreams, the chaos of right now. You can tell him the reality of how it is. He already knows, but he loves to hear your voice. And then look back to the story of Joseph and the blessing and yet the betrayal. But finally the realization that God had a plan. And Lord Jesus, because you suffered and died and rose and are now ascended and glorified, we can have confidence that even when our lives are marred with shattered dreams, there is healing in the present and complete healing in the new creation. There is a future to come in which the shattered dreams are replaced with your great purposes for us, all utterly, satisfyingly, beautifully fulfilled, as we live with you forever in face-to-face joy and delight, as we share in the reign of your kingdom forever and experience life without suffering or mourning or crying or pain, when we are known, where we know as we are known, and when every tear is wiped away. Lord, help us as we live in this vale of tears with so many shattered dreams even now. Help us to keep hold of that eternal hope and to know that you have a plan and that you will be faithful. We praise you. Amen. Amen. We're going to hear a story of someone in our church family who's had to trust God in difficult times. Please watch the screens.
Hi, so I'm Leela. I'm a member here of Above Bar Church and have been for about 8-9 years now. So the story starts in about 2012 when I was working for Thomas Cook abroad as a singer and a dancer in hotels. So towards the end of my second season, while I was in Dante, I started to notice that my voice would kind of disappear towards the end of the night, so I'd have to kind of push through my set and through the show, and then by the end of the night I just would have no voice. I came home in November for the winter season and my voice just didn't come back. I went to the doctors to kind of find out what was going on. And they discovered that I had a cyst on my left vocal cord. Cysts can be shrunk just naturally by doing various kind of warm-ups and things like that. So that kind of started my journey of this process of speech therapy, learning how to speak again and learning how to sing again. And hopefully in doing so, it would shrink this cyst that was on my vocal cord. After this appointment, they, sort of in the space of half an hour, I was told, actually, if you want to resolve this and we want to have speech therapy and try and fix it, that I would need to quit my job, that I would need to stop singing kind of immediately to try and have any hope of it kind of fixing itself. Yeah, I walked out of this 30-minute appointment and it felt like my whole life had just changed within a window. I had no control over it. I'd been doing my dream job. I absolutely loved what I was doing. And I'd just been told, basically, you need to stop. You're not allowed to do that anymore. And it did sort of feel like my whole world had just crumbled. Although, speech therapy people have taught me a lot of techniques about how to care for and maintain my voice, it actually didn't have any effect on shrinking the cyst, which is what they hoped it would do. So in the end, the decision was made that they were going to operate. It was supposed to be a fairly simple process, but afterwards I woke up from the anaesthetic and I had the surgeon's hand in my face. Don't speak. You need to not speak for a week. He said, the operation went well, we've removed the cyst, but we had to do more than we thought initially, and therefore we're not sure your speaking voice will even be the same, let alone your singing voice. And in that moment, I thought it was going to be all right, and everything had just been taken away again. Yeah, so then because I'd had an operation, they needed to do some speech therapy to effectively teach my voice how to speak in its new format, teaching my muscles what they needed to do for speaking. And the hope was, maybe for singing, but the likelihood of me singing was going to be quite small. Yeah, so at this point, my faith was a very interesting ride. As you can imagine, I was doing this dream job, I thought everything was mapped out. I was quite happy with God. I was like, yeah, thanks. And when all of that changed, I think I have to be really honest and say I actually really hated God. I felt like he'd ruined my plans. I thought I was trying to honour God in what I was doing, through using my voice and through dancing. And I just thought, this isn't fair. Nobody else has to do this. Nobody else has to get up in the morning and do warm-ups to be able to communicate with people. Yes and no. The speech therapy did start to work. I started to notice a change in my voice. It became a bit more of a, I can actually use my voice to communicate with people. But the focus was on speaking. So I was going to these appointments and they were telling me, this is really good. But I think all the time I was thinking, well, yes, but no, it's not. I'm still not singing. And I had to do a lot of work in myself and in my relationship with God to come to terms with the fact that maybe the speaking was going to be great, but that there wasn't going to be any singing. And that was really tough. Even now, I don't think I come to terms with, what my voice might do in the future. But you can hear today I have a voice. It's great. I can speak to you, and you may well have seen me up the front singing at church. There is a voice there. Speech therapy got me back to kind of a more level playing field, but it hasn't fixed the problem. There's still issues that might be there that I have to contend with. Trusting God now is a really interesting one. I think when I was going through all of this, at the time I had no idea what God was doing, but in hindsight I look back on it and I see that God was stripping away all of these layers, or these lies, or these kind of words that had been spoken over me or that I'd spoken over myself, is to say that, I was only valuable and was only worthy if I could sing. So I felt like God was saying, actually, no, Leela, before all of that, you are a child of God, you are my daughter, I have plans for you, and singing and your voice come after that. They're not the things that define you. So yes, there is a happy ending now in that I am currently singing. I now don't really have to think about what I'm doing with my voice, but it doesn't mean that tomorrow I won't wake up and I'll be struggling. So I think now I have to trust God totally, day by day, and I'm not very good at it all the time, but I do just have to trust God and know that if I wake up tomorrow and my voice doesn't work, I can still walk outside and say, there's something that God's got for me to do today. I talked about it being my dream job, but actually now I'm teaching dance full time, which is what I trained to do, and I run my own company. I'm able to impact young people, and I'm able to bring confidence out of adults who, didn't think that dancing was a thing and now they love. And actually maybe that's what God had planned. What I see as my dream and the plans that God has for me aren't necessarily those things, and that I can trust him even when things are bad. Actually, God always knows better. He has more. My voice doesn't define me. God defines me.
Really grateful to Leela for sharing her story there.